Actually, the whole automotive insights and strategy is based, and this is now sounds very funny, on a Chinese cooking club.
Hello and welcome to the Auto Ethnographer. I'm John Stech, your host on this journey. We travel the globe to bring you stories about culture and the global automotive industry. Fasten your seatbelt and let's get started. Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Auto Ethnographer. Today I have a guest that brings a truly global lens to the automotive world. Alexandra Strassburger is currently the head of IT for global sales and marketing at Mercedes-Benz Cars, where she leads diverse teams across Stuttgart and the globe in shaping the future of digitized, standardized sales. With a career spanning over 2 decades at Mercedes-Benz, Alexandra has held pivotal roles in sales, marketing, R&D, and strategy. But what sets her apart is a deep intercultural fluency, honed through 11 transformative years living and working in China as a German citizen. From setting up product management in Beijing to making sure that Mercedes-Benz as an organization understands China by building the China Insights division, she's helped define the Mercedes-Benz portfolio for one of the world's most dynamic markets, and indeed, the world's largest automotive market. Alexandra's journey is an example in navigating cultural nuance and organizational complexity. Whether leading teams in China or pioneering data-driven marketing strategies back in Germany, she's consistently bridged East and West with empathy, precision, and clarity. Her experience offers rare insight into how cultural context shapes consumer behavior, brand perception, and strategic decision-making in the auto industry. With that, I'd like to introduce Alexandra to the program. Hi, Alexandra, welcome.
Hi, John. Super happy to be here.
Well, you have a very interesting story, Alexandra. You moved to China and ended up living there for 11 years. I'd love to talk first about just the personal side of the journey and your cultural experience. You moved there, let's say, young, not having a family, and just settling into China in the beginning. What motivated that move, and how did your family react to going over to China back at a time when it wasn't even that much on the radar?
Absolutely. I mean, the story is really a long story. It starts when I was 5. My dad actually had huge exchange programs with the Karl Duisburg Gesellschaft. He himself worked in the cooling industry. And he always had Chinese groups at my house. So since I'm 5, I was exposed to intercultural exchanges where Chinese business partners were sitting at our home table, wanted to experience a German family. And we were singing Auf der Schwäbischen Eisenbahn, which is a traditional German song. So that was my first exposure to China. And somehow this stayed in my studies. I had Chinese friends. I always got connected. And actually, Mercedes-Benz was so kind during my studies. I was part of their career program to send me over for 6 months. And then I was hooked, literally hooked on China. And when the opportunity came and the call came, do you want to come to us to China? And as you said, it was not the place to go at that time. My then boyfriend, I said, hey, do you want to come with me? He said, I'll have to stay. And then he married me a month before I left. So I couldn't run away. We're still married. And actually, that's how it all started. And it was really a matter of curiosity, the possibility to grow and have an adventure. I was 27 when I left. I was super young. Come on. What do you have to lose? Just go and run. And come on, Chinese food. Gumbao Jiding, I would always go for that.
Well, it sounds like you had a similar getting married for a visa type of situation. I was also married just before I went to Vietnam so that my wife could come along and be supported with a visa.
Yeah, the funny story is actually he didn't come along. He stayed in Stuttgart for at least 1.5 years until he said, wow, that's so much fun. It's so interesting. And he actually then moved to South China, where we had a van joint venture, because he also works for Mercedes. And that's how we then had Beijing, Fuzhou for a while. So we really made the most out of it.
Wow, that's actually adds a whole nother dimension to the story. You land there alone, basically. And did you speak Chinese already by the time you arrived from the university days, or not?
I had a little bit of ni hao and stuff, really basics. And I did not make enough time during my internship there to really learn Chinese. So I made a huge effort when I arrived to, at 7 a.m. in the morning, take Chinese classes. But this was really tough because it was a new role, a new leadership role. I was totally overwhelmed at the beginning, alone, And so how I learned Chinese is actually, I was in the luxury of having a Chinese driver because I was not allowed to drive there at the beginning. And he was my Chinese teacher. That's how I started really picking up. And that's how I learned Chinese. Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. So I'm sure you probably also learned some great phrases and some of the local slang as well when you learned in that particular way.
Yeah. I mean, the Beijing Hua is like mer, burr. It's a lot of deep sounds. And that's how my Chinese grew. But it became very Southern when we moved eventually down to the South. And a lot of people nowadays are saying you have a very Southern accent. It's really funny.
That's great that you can pick it out. So you then went on to learn in a more formalized way.
Yes, I actually, my whole learning experience was a very pragmatic one. I had a teacher, but I just started talking. Whenever I had an opportunity, I took the opportunity and spoke to these people in my broken Chinese. And that's how I improved it. It was very, very, I always said it's a road-based learning. So whenever on the weekend I went out, I wanted to understand Beijing. I wanted to sit down with the people. And in Beijing, if you talk to people, they speak for sure not English, they speak Chinese. And that's how I learned it. I had also books. I had a teacher, but the teacher was not long with me because I realized I'm going to do it like this. But we had a good competition in the team. I had a lovely colleague from France, and she was very good in Chinese. And so she was like pushing me to really get on the same level because she was fluent, and I wanted to be on the same level as her. Absolutely.
And the language is one thing. What about the kind of the social etiquette or the work culture? So you've come in from Stuttgart, and Stuttgart, of course, is, I know personally, very different from Asia. So how did you adapt to that? Were there any kind of shocks, things that you had to adapt yourself to very quickly?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the first year, and I apologized already to the team, it was my first leadership role. And I was very German, right? You write meeting minutes, they have to be in a certain format, blah, blah, blah. And I was very, very adamant about bringing the German standard to China. And my poor team, I felt, now retrospectively, I really feel sorry because I was very German and very controlling. And this first year, it was very painful because I realized somehow it's not working. Somehow it's not, it's not clicking. And when I realized that I have to adapt, that I have to change, and that I have to really change also my way of working, then it worked wonders and we had the most fun. But I had to come through this year to understand that everything I grew up with, the German way of working won't work. And then I was matching out of both worlds, what the Chinese do well, being pragmatic, finding solutions, a can-do attitude to, hey, but really think it through, make it really thorough, the German, I think, skills and strength, and combining them. That was for me the magic key.
What did you have to drop as a German? What were some of the things you had to drop?
Being black and white, and being very detailed in what I want from people. At the beginning, I had tasks lists and I tracked them, and this didn't work. And I also, don't forget that we were really just opening up the Beijing office. There were not automotive people on the market. I could not hire product managers off the market. So I really had to take also the time to train them. Most of them had studied English as a language. That's why they were with us, but they had no capability or skill in the automotive world. And I had to drop my expectation towards qualification on automotive skills. I could not expect that. And when I dropped that and opened my heart for, hey, come on, we're in this together, I'm going to grow this together, that was super. And then it really was a lot of fun. I just met one of my former teammates because she's still with us. and to reflect on that and say, hey, we went through this together and we both grew. It was really cool.
How about the like working relationships? I remember when I was working for Mercedes a number of years ago. Of course, you could go for 20 years sitting next to somebody in the same room and call them, Herr Schmidt or Frau Schmidt, and never really get to know them. How was it in China? Was there more of a porous wall between personal and work, or were there also walls like there were in Germany? Although I know that's changing.
Oh, when you say that, actually, this was one of the things I had to learn very fast. I came from exactly that, what you're describing. Schnaps is Schnaps and beer is beer, right? So you really separate work and private life. And first of all, when I moved there, I really also tried not to hang out with the expat community because they were all work buddies, right? And also not with work buddies, with any Chinese work buddies. I just tried to be like, separate. But as an expat, you die. You die of aloneness and loneliness and not having anybody around you. So I had to learn that it's okay to hang out in private life with your work people. And what I actually took from China to Germany is the closeness with my team members. And if I look into all my team relations over the 11 years in China, I was always super close. I know their families. I know what's going on in their lives. They know about my life. I am and was very open about what's happening in my life. And if I imagine, when my first son was then born in Beijing, the work guys were the first ones to see him. That's how it was, right? And we really, also weekends were not so harsh as in Stuttgart. It's very, very different. You hang out at night, you go for dinner, you do private stuff together. Also, as a company, you are very much investing into social activities for the team members. Something where the Stuttgart people would say, hey, come on, it's a Wochenende, leave me alone. I want to have a weekend. Don't bother me.
Right.
And where the
exactly.
Chinese are very, very happy to have a family day and have these activities, which I really, really enjoy. And I think they're important to build closeness to the company.
Now, I did notice that, yes, also there seems to be that overlap, that kind of an openness. It varies massively. Even in different Asian countries, you have different degrees of that type of an openness.
No, in China, it was really fun because I at first thought it's difficult to separate, sometimes at work you have to take funny decisions, right? Or hard decisions that are not fun. And I was at the beginning worried, will this cause an issue to my, acceptance as a decision maker, as a leader? But it was not at all. Actually, it increased my acceptance. And I feel this today, even in Stuttgart, that this builds trust. People know why I do things, that can relate to this. And then they're usually much more supportive in my decisions. So all the fears I brought from Germany were completely useless. I could just avoid them and learned a lot. I grew a lot there.
Now, that was going to be a question I wanted to ask you, what you brought back, but you really answered it. You brought back a different mindset on how to lead, which I think is really important. I would imagine you were there for 11 years. Did you find that Germany changed in the 11 years that you were gone? Because I find that it's changed quite a bit in the almost, I would say, roughly 20 years since I worked directly with Mercedes-Benz.
It has changed, yes. But what was for us very interesting and super surprising when we came back, because everybody told us, Alexandra, it's going to be horrible. You will not like to be coming from an expat life into this typical German life. And actually, it was not at all like this, because for us, we left as a 1 month married couple, or I left, and then we came back as a family of 4. Our 2 sons were born in Beijing. So our life had significantly changed. But what I really observed is Germany has become much more international, much more diverse, something which was not the case when I left. And I think that's something which I really, really observed. And then, of course, but this is something which my husband and I always loved when we came back, that it was so different. There's Wertstoffhof, which is basically on the weekends, you have to bring your separated garbage to a certain place to recycle it, right? That's something you don't do necessarily in China. You have usually people doing that for you. But also these things we embraced, right? It was just another adventure we went on. And it was nice to have family back again, because usually they were super far away. So we loved every piece of it.
Yeah, I personally found, and I had a previous podcast episode about it. It was actually, for me, the most difficult part was going home. All of these adventures that I had, back in home, in my home country, nobody seemed to somehow appreciate that. They lived their normal lives in the 8 years that I was gone. And then when I came back, they asked a few questions, and that was it. For me, that was the most challenging part.
But that's interesting, because for us, we made always sure during the 11 years that everybody stayed on top of what we're doing. So I really made sure that we really share extensively on videos and photos and making sure they know. I also brought back Chinese cooking events to my family. I do China community events at Mercedes-Benz. So I really integrated this Chineseness of myself into my daily life. So people can't escape, actually. We do every year on Chinese New Year a huge party at our house to commemorate the most important festival for us as a German Chinese family. So we really, really, without asking them, just integrated them into our culture. We made sure they're part of what we do. And actually, funny enough, now this Chinese New Year is the event in our circle of friends where all the kids are waiting for. Oh, let's do Chinese New Year again. Let's do jiaozi. Let's do the dumplings. Let's really make sure we're doing this. So you know what? Maybe, John, we were super just overwhelming for them and integrating them.
I love that. I love that you went and took it to that degree. You and I had spoken once before, and you also shared with me that you took a pretty unconventional decision about the education of your kids in China. Can you talk about that one a little bit?
Yes. So basically, when the kids were born, the decision of my husband and myself was we don't want to put them into the German schooling system. For us, it was extremely important that they are raised in a local mindset. What does it mean? We were super lucky. We had a nanny, which I would call my sister, Bihua. We actually visited her this year again. We had vacation time in China again with the family. We flew home, so to say. And basically, Bihua made sure, she lived with us for 7 years, the whole time the kids were born while we were in China. And she made sure that we are integrated. She made sure that we speak Chinese at home, that we eat Chinese, that we live by Chinese traditional medicine. So if you're coughing, you don't eat yogurt and muesli in the morning. You have then nothing fried in the morning. You make sure that you eat according to traditional Chinese medicine, anything that doesn't bring heat into your body. So that was our reality. That was the first unconventional decision, I guess. We were really integrated into China. The other element was we were choosing a kindergarten where Chinese was part of the language curriculum. They had bits and pieces of German, but it was Chinese, English, and then only a bit of German. And that was then a choice that made it for us local and relatable. And when Malte then had to go to an international school, we went for the British school because we just didn't want to go. We didn't want to go into the German system. We just felt like when we're here, let us be fully here and let us be fully immersed and let us really take every snippet of it to be in it.
So if I were to ask your kids, are they German? Are they Chinese? Are they international? What are they?
Oh, that's a very good question. If you would have asked them 3 years after return, they would have told you they're Chinese and they want to go home. It was for 3 years, every morning, Mom, we want to go home. They now are back 7-8 years and they would say they're German. I think we made that move and mindset shift. Yet, when we just flew back now this year, they said it feels very much home because that's their smells they're used to. It's very deeply rooted. And even I myself, and this is now super weird and it's hard to understand, but if you ask me where my home is, it's in Chaoyang Beilu in Beijing. That's when I arrive, I feel at home. And it's super weird and it's hard to relate, but these were my defining years. 27 to 38, my kids are born there. For me, Beijing feels very much like home.
It's wonderful when something like that happens. It's kind of rare in life. Sometimes you find that place that feels like home in your country, your home country, but sometimes you find it somewhere else, which is even more surprising. That you it's different. It has a different language, different
Mhm.
social fabric, and so on. But you just feel somehow perfectly at home. It's
Yeah.
great when you find that.
Yeah.
They still practice their Chinese.
Yeah, of course. Oh, for sure. First of all, when we're in public and I need to tell them something that not everybody should hear, we do it all in Chinese, because then we have our secret language. It's very convenient. The other thing at home also, just on Sunday, this Sunday, we played Mahjong and did Chinese tea ceremony. So that's something we do as we're just, that's us. And then, of course, they have every week, and then we speak Chinese when we do that. And then we also have a Chinese class, a Chinese teacher who teaches them every week. Yeah. And they do Duolingo. They're having their strike. They have to keep their strike in Chinese.
I love that. That's
Yeah.
fantastic. That's fantastic. I,
Mm-hmm.
I went through the same when I was younger. I immigrated to the US from Germany. And so I had years and years and years of German classes after school or on the weekends. And I did not appreciate it at the time as a kid. I wanted to play with my friends, but I have to say in my adulthood, I appreciate it. And I'm sure that your children will as well.
You know what is funny? It was always a fight to do Chinese classes. But when we now this summer were back home, it clicked with them. So they're very adamant now about making sure they can attend Chinese class. And if schedules are moving, they make sure that they have their Chinese class. It's very interesting to see. They're 13 and 15 now, probably some sense comes up.
Well, there is that time of your life as a young teen where you want to be just like all of your friends. You don't want to be different. But there is also that moment when there's like a click in your mind where you realize, hey, I have something special. And it sounds like they've found that moment
Mm-hmm.
of illumination.
Yeah.
So Alexandra, you've gone through and you've explained in great detail how you and your family really integrated far beyond what many other expats do when they live abroad for some years. So how did that end up impacting your work style? How did your personal and full acclimation to China translate into success in the workplace? And let's talk a little bit about what you also did for Mercedes-Benz there, because you contributed something quite valuable.
Yeah, and it's a very uncommon story, and I often tell it to people who ask for career advice because they always think you have to plan it out. And actually, my biggest learning in my career was because it's going to take a bit longer to explain it, but it gives the context. So basically, I was pregnant with Malte, and we moved to Fuzhou because my husband was living in Fuzhou. And I was sitting there bored out with a little baby, not knowing what to do because there was no job to be done, right? And I realized that the community there was very distant from China. And as I was used to something else, I thought, hey, let's walk the city and see what's going on there. And I spoke Chinese, right? So I started doing that. And out of it grew an initiative that was called Fuzhou Culture Club, where we actually started doing cultural tours and cooking sessions and learning about traditional Chinese medicine and how the social system works and how schooling works and so on. And interesting enough, all of that sounds so not automotive, at the end ended up in Mercedes-Benz cars, all this knowledge. Some years later, when we went back to Beijing, and then when I got the opportunity to start in research and development, actually all the insights I had from traditional Chinese medicine, from how societies work, how family structures work, they were then put into translating what Chinese customers want and what Chinese cars need. So my advice always to the young people is don't underestimate these side gigs because they could lead really to impactful things in your workplace. And that's what happened with me, actually.
That's really cool, I have to say. I love that you had this, well, side gig as you called it. It's amazing way just to learn. I actually recommended recently to someone else that, for example, like a cooking class is one of the greatest ways to learn a culture, since food is what everybody knows about different cultures. And then as you learn what's behind it, you get those nuanced layers.
Nobody thinks this is something. Everybody thinks, yeah, they're cooking. These ladies doing cooking classes. Yeah, but it became important.
Well, it what you described before, that having a cold muesli and yogurt in the morning, or something wasn't what you have something more traditional, and if you understand that about the local culture, that takes you to another level. Let's talk about what you were doing there at Mercedes-Benz. You were responsible for product strategy, and you had to pretty much by definition understand the consumer. So how did you start to roll all this type of knowledge about the consumer, about the culture, into your work? How did that take root?
It was actually in a two-step thing. I was very lucky that the van department put me back into product management at that time for a year before my second son was born in Fuzhou. And that was the first time with my Chinese insights that I had from this Fuzhou Culture Club that I understood, okay, somehow the cars are not yet fitting. In this case, the Sprinter and the V-Class. I was like, why is that? And then I circled back to everything I had learned in these cooking classes and in all these cultural seminars that we offered, that I realized, there is something different. And I realized, for example, out of traditional Chinese medicine, that air conditions should not be blown to the jigai, to the joints, because that's something where then the cold could come into the body. And if you understand these things, you suddenly realize, we have to do things different. And that's what we learned for the vans, where we translated this into the cars and said, there we have to really adjust. People are of different height. We had to adjust seat height and stuff. Small things that had to be done because we realized it's different. So that's where it started. This was my first tickling. But when we then moved to Beijing and I got hired into RD, and they actually wanted me to do and run the insights team. There was Extra in China Insights team founded at that time in RD. I could really indulge myself this. And from first ickling and inches of I have a hunch to solidifying it with data, doing trend research, and understanding really fact-based, going away from a hunch, what China is and how it's being built off. And I think a pivotal moment was that my then RD head made a very important statement. He said, Alexandra, don't explain the engineer the problem, the solution. Explain to them the problem. You have to explain to them the problem, then they can help you with the solution. And I think this was very, very important to understand, that I don't come with, listen, this is what Chinese need, and paint it down, but really utilize this amazing force of Mercedes-Benz engineering team to tell them, look, that's who we are as China. These are our problems. And if you move a car from the Black Forest from Germany to China, that's what has to change. And this was, I think, vital for the way I could then work and how we then as a team worked.
So in the United States with Mercedes-Benz, and I had a guest on the third episode, Dr. Helmut Größer, who explained that the magic secret to the U.S. market was the cup holder. What was the magic secret for China? Something that you influenced and helped to bring into the vehicles that you believe was of great critical cultural acceptance.
I think there's so many things. I mean, the long cars was something that was already there. That's nothing that comes from me. But this whole idea of that there are people sitting in the second row, this dedication to the rear, that there is a grandmother in the family structure who sits there, that the culture is very generous with regards to taking care of, relationships, and that you pick up people, you have separates in the restaurant, that this has to be taken care of, that then these grandmothers are having phones, they need to charge them, that you have a storage unit, stuff like that was extremely vital for us to say, let's make sure that there a customer feels comfortable. And that's different from Germany, because they're usually a sports bag or a dog is sitting. If you look into numbers, yes, there are also kids, but it's a very different kind of environment. A US soccer mom versus a Chinese hosting environment.
No, that's certainly a difference in the use case of the vehicles, and even just how many people ride in a car on average.
Right.
It's very different. My understanding is that you ultimately then developed a kind of a system to help gather information and to help funnel that to engineering. You already touched on that, not to give the engineers the solutions, but to explain the problem to them. Can you explain a little bit how you gathered information, field research or data or local partnerships or things like that?
It was such an interesting journey because we were sitting there as the China team. And again, China was just in the growing. It was 2006. Don't forget, it's a long time ago, right? So we're in 2000, no, not 2006. When was it back? 2012, right? Roughly that array. So it's a long time ago. And then we were like, how can we make sure, because Mercedes is a big organization, how can we make sure that everybody understands it quick? And instead of, writing solutions, how can we develop a logic, again, German logic, that people understand what are the buckets they have to feed into, that they can then work and they really utilize the energy of everybody and the creativity and the engineering power. And basically what we did is, and this is also, I guess, so out of this world that, we went in and collected research on how do families develop. I looked into how hand size develop, how body limbs are developing. We really looked into all the data in detail. We looked into what do people do daily, everyday life. We really did a lot of studies on how people use cars. And this was for me super interesting because we got really in touch again with the people, how they're living their car life, to really understand it. And then what we did with this data, I could convince the engineers or describe to the engineers how the situation is. And can you imagine, I go into an engineering meeting and talk not about seat cushion size or anything like that, but about how social structures in China work. So I explained to them, how a family works, how the social security system is working or not compared to Germany, how these guangxi, the relationships, are so important. And that's why we need to go, for example, for a different kind of hosting environment inside of a Mercedes-Benz. And this, I think, sounds super odd, but that was the input for the engineering team on how lives are happening. So they could do their best to really develop the cars then to the best way the Chinese actually loved it then and wanted it.
In a microcosm, you've actually just really used the more Chinese way of communicating, right? Because you've explained all of the nuances around, gone around the whole tree without necessarily describing exactly the tree, right?
Exactly. But that was vital because what we realized, that was one of my earlier observations, is we all spoke English with each other and we all understood the words. But what I then realized, and I used this very often in the organization, even when I was back, I was once in a while invited and say, can you explain this again to us? When we say, and I always use this one term, when you say breakfast, as a German, I think about a roll, a coffee cup, a muesli. But if you say breakfast in Chinese, you also say breakfast in English. But the picture that is associated with us is very, very different. You have a zhou, you have a youqiao. Zhou is a rice soup. The youqiao is like a breadstick. That's what you have for breakfast. So we talk about breakfast, but the pictures we associate are super different. And I said, guys, whenever we are having conversations, we need to understand the context. We need to understand the environment we're in so we can talk to each other. Because that was at the beginning a problem. We thought, we had a conversation. Didn't they understand what we need? And it was very frustrating at the beginning. But when we realized, now we really have to tell them about how it is, what the problem is. And again, I come back to my head of engineering. He was so smart. He said, Alex, don't describe to them the solution, describe the problem. And this worked magic for the organization. And the whole, also top management, everybody supported it. Everybody bought into this. This was fantastic. It was really, really fantastic.
Where at that point in time, where was the engineering located? Was it in China already, or was it still back in Stuttgart?
We had parts in China. Yeah, absolutely. We were
At that time already.
we had an RD engineering center. That's why I was hired in. Yeah.
Okay. What was, if you think back, maybe the biggest or surprising use case difference in how the Chinese use their cars on a daily basis? I mean, I can explain to you how Americans are different from Germans, but how are Chinese different from Germans, for example, in the use of their cars?
I I think the biggest surprising probably element was when we did the interior study on how much things Chinese have additionally in the car as decoration. The tissue box is always there. There is a lot of things in the car that are added to the car. May it be seat covers that are very, at that time, were super expressive, which was very surprising to us. And also, again, the tissue box, air refreshers. There was a lot of stuff in the car compared to European cars. So this is something in a very detailed how they stored stuff was really, really different, what we knew. Yeah.
And what would you say was, just as an example, your biggest contribution? What's the one thing you can point to in a particular car where you could say, hey, I did that?
Oh, I guess the air quality element that we have in every car worldwide, by the way, because we realized at that time Chinese air was really, really polluted, and allergies were on the move in global, right? That we said, hey, we have to do something about that. And I think that's something where me as a person, I would never say me alone, because one thing was vital in this whole thing. It was a China team. We stood there as a community. And we stood there as a team, no matter whether we were RD, sales, finance, it was the China team. And that what made us very strong, because we were together having one voice on what we needed. And I think this is something that we really did, that we made sure that you could read, how is the air quality outside? How is it inside? We had enough filters integrated into the car. And I think that's something at that time, but what you could really say, that was from us. Amongst many other things, but this is something very known until today.
That's really big. I mean, that's really big. I live in a city as well, in Bangkok, which has a very high AQI, the PM 2.5, and so if this is something that was developed in China and then made its way around the world, I mean, that's a really big contribution.
Yeah, we were quite pleased with that, and it really fixed the problem. Because when my kids were raised in Beijing, I always said they're house cats because they had to be inside. The air quality was terrible. When we moved back up in 2012, it was above 1,000 AQI. We couldn't get out. We had to wear, face masks. It was not Corona, it was air quality. And that's why it triggered it. We had air purifier everywhere.
I'm sure that's something that you don't miss now that you're back in Stuttgart. Although I have to say, I think the Chinese air quality has improved dramatically.
It's fantastic.
We
were swimming in the Liangmar River in summer. I mean, this is what China did is amazing. Air quality is great. In Beijing, the river when I was an intern was green with algae. Now we went canoeing. People were swimming in it. And that's a dramatic change. I mean, it has improved drastically. But now allergies are coming in. So you need to make sure to keep the allergies out.
Exactly. So now that you are back in Stuttgart for quite some years already, what do you miss most? What do you miss most about China? You've already talked about having the holiday for the Chinese New Year. Yeah. What else do you miss?
I miss, for sure, food. That's why we cook a lot. Chinese foods till today. Actually, this coming Sunday, my whole family will come again. We're going to cook Chinese food again for everyone. What I also miss, and it was also part of the time when I was there, this gross, let's do it pragmatism. I mean, it was a very, very strong growth period, these 11 years when I was there. The market was literally growing. And so this was really fun. That's something I miss, but I know reality has changed. And what I think is still there in China is pragmatism. Get things done, try things out, being super open for digitization. Amazed me then, amazes me now, how people of all ages are glued to their phone. Everything goes via WeChat. That's impressive. And that's something I miss.
It's interesting. On a previous podcast, I'm actually releasing one on Wednesday, tomorrow. It's about the comparison of China to Europe by a Chinese person who went to Europe for the first time. And she describes exactly the same about the being glued to the telephone versus enjoying life without the telephone in hand.
And it has its pros and cons, right? And it has its pros and cons. So I really, again, we're super happy to be back. But we miss China nevertheless, because it has both sides have its advantage. And being glued to the phone is not necessarily always very communicative, right? When you're having dinner. So, yeah.
Very true. Very true. I remember one time sitting in a restaurant, my children were playing something on their phones, and I actually sent them an SMS to choose from the menu what they wanted to eat. And that was the only way to get them to up from their phones.
Mm-hmm. And that's something, it's also very strong in Europe, but it's not through all generations. Because something that I observed, I was there on a business trip last year. I was in one of these classic hutong old restaurants, Lao Beijing kitchen. And it was super quiet when I had lunch. And I looked around and I was like, why is it so quiet? Because, in Beijing restaurants, it's usually super loud and everybody talks. And I realized that now also the older generation, the 80 years old, are on their phone and not talking to each other anymore. And that's something which I observed, I found very interesting to see.
Yeah, I think unfortunately, in a way that's becoming pervasive around the globe, being glued to the phone screen. Yeah. I think you alluded to this earlier. What experience, that you had there, do you continue to like practice, or what influences you even today that changed you? You alluded a little bit to kind of this openness in the communication. Is there something else that you still practice today that makes you a better leader at Mercedes in Stuttgart?
I think one thing that was extremely vital for me in China was that women were leading. It was very common that women are making a career. And I think that's something, if you come from a Swabian background, right? I was supposed to, as soon as the kids are there, go back, take time off and be at home. And that was not even a conversation in China. When I brought it up with our nanny, she looked at me and said, why? I'm here. Don't worry. Right. And so this conversation was really interesting, because she was the one actually, whenever I started to become like, should I stay more at home? And, she was like, no, you go, girl. Let's rock it. Right. Because that was very common in China, that women make their career, and that it was not a conversation if I can. And that was something, and is something that really shaped me. And I had to learn in the conversations with female leaders here to understand their problems, because I didn't have them. I didn't have these limitations of no childcare. I didn't have these limitations of a family looking on me. My mom was very far away, right? So there was nobody who could say, Alexandra, why are you working? Of course, I have a Swabian family in my background. And of course, they have their way of thinking. But in China, this was so far away.
That's a pretty dramatic example. And I think it's it shows just how divergent the cultures really are in their mindset. Yeah. And one of my previous podcast guests also pointed out that important role of women in the workplace in China, especially as leaders.
And it's very common, very normal. A lot of my Chinese friends are really, they're amazing CEOs. They're running these huge companies and they have their kids and they're just doing it. And I'm so impressed all the time. They're really great role models, how they run it and how they do it. And again, the system supports it. Here we have structural issues that are not supporting it. So I totally understand. I'm not blaming any German woman who can't do it, because there are framework conditions that are different. I was really, really lucky to be in China when the kids were small. That was really, really helpful. Yeah.
So your career has really spanned at Mercedes from really an internship to being a leader today in IT for sales and marketing. If you could go back to your younger self and give some advice to a younger Alexandra, or a professional just getting into the business, what advice would you give to somebody today?
I think what was really decisive for me is to not follow the classic career rules. Because what I was always confronted with, 11 years in China, everybody told me, you're not going to do a big career. You kill your career with this. Come back to headquarters. You have to come back to headquarters. I didn't, because for us as a family, it felt right. It felt good to be out there. And it was for us the right decision. And I think, don't be intimidated by these rules on how career works. Really make sure that you define it for yourself. It's your life at the end. It's your life, and you have to decide what is important for you. But don't get intimidated that, oh, then your career ends. It didn't. So
No,
I think, right?
I think that's great advice for somebody to really follow their heart and to do what's right for them.
And look at this Fuzhou cooking club. Again, I followed my heart. I did it because I loved it. I had fun. This Fuzhou culture club, I wanted to do it because I enjoyed it. And I think that's another thing. Put your all in, own it to the last bit of piece. Do it with passion or not at all. Just go in.
Even better advice. Before we close down the episode, are there any other kind of closing words from your side? Anything that jumped into mind?
I think for especially, a lot of people are always asking me, should I go abroad? And without a blink of an eye, I say, if you have the opportunity, run, go, do it. Do it, please do it. And a lot of people that came to me and asked me this question, they went and they were so happy. And I have never met anyone who went abroad, no matter what country, and regretted it. And if somebody has, please call me. But I don't remember anyone because everybody sees this as an enrichment. And it's not always easy. It's not always a walk in a park. It was not always the straight line, but it's so enriching. And your life is so much more colorful afterwards. So I think go for it. Yeah.
I fully agree. That's why I built an entire podcast around that theme of working abroad and blending cultures and working together.
See?
Well, Alexandra, I do want to thank you very much for joining me on the podcast today. I do want to point out that in Stuttgart there is a moment of sunshine in the background in November, which is very unusual. So thank you for using some of that sunshiny day to join me in a room with the blinds down and the camera on and on the podcast.
Thank you, John. Thanks for the talk. It was a lot of fun looking back.
I'm glad you enjoyed that. So with that, I'd like to close down the episode and thank the listeners for joining in this week. Until next week, keep on driving. Thank you for joining us on today's journey. Please remember to like and subscribe to the Auto Ethnographer and leave us a rating or comment. For more information, visit our website at auto-ethnographer.com. You can also follow on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn.